Hello, I'm Dr. Roberta Jackson, and today I wanted to tell you about a very exciting process happening right in our backyard. Before I do that, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I've had a love of the outdoors for as long as I can remember, and feel lucky to live in a beautiful place like Bellingham with my husband and kids. This passion for the environment led me to pursue a PhD in environmental management, and I currently work for Nooksack Environmental Consulting Firm here in Bellingham. As an environmental consultant, it's my job to study issues like polluted lands and offer my expertise in solving the problem. Consulting firms are used to perform a variety of tasks, such as environmental sampling and monitoring, advising on polluted site cleanup, and ensuring that our clients are in compliance with environmental regulations. Consulting in Washington and working on polluted sites means I work closely with the Washington State Department of Ecology. We call them Ecology. The Department of Ecology is a state government agency, and their mission is to protect, preserve, and enhance the environment by supporting environmental work throughout the state. One way Ecology does this is by overseeing the cleanup of polluted sites. I work for clients who are somehow responsible for environmental problems. Ecology makes sure that the work I do for my clients meets the state regulations. My specialty as a consultant is to evaluate polluted or contaminated site conditions and design effective cleanup plans to comply with applicable laws. With Nooksack Environmental Consulting, I've helped improve the environment by helping my clients clean up contaminated sites. In case you don't know what a contaminated site is, it's land or water that has chemicals present because of activities like accidental chemical spills or improper disposal of dangerous chemicals. These chemicals have the potential to cause harmful effects like cancer to humans, but can also greatly impact wildlife and the environment. Because of this, these materials are commonly referred to as hazardous substances. To stop the effects of these substances, I follow a regulation called the Model Toxics Control Act, or MOTCA. MOTCA is similar to the United States Superfund law, but it is only for Washington state. The United States Superfund program was created to clean up some of the nation's worst contaminated sites. The Love Canal disaster was the event that demonstrated the need for a federal program to clean up hazardous sites and protect the public from exposure to dangerous chemicals. Love Canal is a neighborhood in Niagara, New York, and was the location of a former landfill that was used by the Hooker Chemical Company to dispose of toxic waste. Houses and a school were built on the land after the landfill closed in the 1950s. In 1978, an unusual amount of rainfall caused flooding and forced the toxic waste that was improperly stored out of the ground. Residents began noticing a foul odor and black sludge erupting in their backyards. Metal drums with waste in them also popped out of the ground. Not only were there toxic chemicals being released, there were effects to people. For example, children had chemical burns on their hands and feet from playing outside. As a result, the Superfund law was created, and Love Canal was the first federal Superfund cleanup site. Before the site was cleaned up, people were evacuated from their homes, prioritizing pregnant women and children because of the high risk of birth defects. To this day, these victims are still being watched closely to see how the legacy of these hazardous chemicals affects human health years later. Since then, the Superfund program has helped to clean up the nation's most severe historically contaminated sites. However, it could take decades for these sites to go through the entire Superfund process and be cleaned up. So to avoid the delays associated with the federal program, the Model Toxics Control Act was created to focus on in-state contaminated sites. As a Washington state cleanup law, MOTCA helps to establish what levels of chemicals and other hazardous substances can be in the environment without posing a risk of effects like cancer and death to humans and wildlife. When Nooksack Environmental Consulting cleans up a contaminated site for our client, we have to make sure the amount of chemicals left behind are below the cleanup levels desired by MOTCA. Throughout my time here at Nooksack Environmental Consulting, I've worked on numerous contaminated sites. My favorite part of this work is getting to see the transformation of the site from something that can harm people, animals, and plants to a place where people can work, live, and play. Knowing that I'm helping to improve the environment through the cleanup of these sites is one of the most rewarding parts of my job. One example of a contaminated site I've worked on is a nearby site that you may be familiar with if you've seen the big white tarps near the waterfront in downtown Bellingham. I wanted to spend the rest of my time on this site so I can show you all the steps we go through to make a cleanup happen. This is the Cornwall landfill site, which is south of downtown on the waterfront, just a half-mile north of Boulevard Park. At this site, there are 17 acres of contaminated land. Part of the land is owned by the city of Bellingham, and the rest is owned by the state. In the late 1880s, the Cornwall landfill site was used for sawmill operations and had logs and wood waste stored on the land. The sawmill operations ended in 1946, and the city of Bellingham began using the site as a landfill from 1953 to 1965. Over that period, 300,000 cubic yards, or 30,000 dump trucks worth of municipal waste, which mostly consisted of household garbage, was disposed of at the site. Most of the waste spilled over into the bay, and so we started essentially creating new land with garbage as the foundation. When the landfill was closed in 1995, the landfill was covered with a layer of soil, and the shoreline was protected from erosion by a layer of rock, boulders, and broken concrete. In 1992, just 3 years after MOTCA was passed into law, someone discovered medical waste, which included glass blood vials and plastic syringes along the beach and the boundary of the landfill. Ecology investigated the waste and determined that it wasn't a risk to the public, but there was concern that other dangerous materials might be present, and this concern led to further investigation. Continued investigations found more chemicals, but this time scientists found them in soil and groundwater that was going into the bay. They also found many different contaminants. As I said before, contaminant is another term we use for chemicals in the environment. These investigations revealed that many of the contaminants were in amounts greater than the MOTCA cleanup levels, which meant humans, animals, and plants could be harmed. Because of this, we decided that someone needed to clean up this site. We have a special term for how cleanup actually happens. This term is remedial action. A remedial action is a plan that addresses the contamination at the site and either removes some or all of the hazardous substances so that MOTCA cleanup levels are met. This makes it so that humans, animals, and plants will not be exposed to enough of the hazardous chemicals to cause harm. As an example, one of the contaminants we found and were concerned with because of the harm it could cause is called polychlorinated biphenyls, or PCBs for short. These are a group of man-made chemicals found in electrical equipment, paints, rubber products, and plastics. When these items were dumped into the landfill back in the 1950s and 60s, the PCBs went in as well. However, since this landfill was not designed to handle these hazardous substances, the PCBs ended up moving out of the landfill and into surrounding soils and Bellingham Bay, where they may stay for decades or longer before breaking down into carbon dioxide and water. This is problematic as PCBs have been shown to cause cancer and can lead to increased risk of pneumonia, short-term memory loss, thyroid problems, and more. Because this site is in the waterfront district of Bellingham, we identified it as a high priority site to clean up. The area is undergoing planning and redevelopment to transition into an urban neighborhood. In addition, it is close to both Bellingham Bay and houses, and so although the probability of people being exposed to the chemicals is low, there's still a chance of contact. However, it is more likely that the wildlife in the bay near the site has come into contact with the chemicals. The decision was that both short-term solutions and more long-term and permanent remedial actions are required to stop this potential exposure. Because decisions on permanent remedial actions can take a long time, short-term solutions are often used to quickly reduce the chance of human or wildlife contact with the chemicals. These solutions are called interim actions. In 2011, an interim action was applied to the site and involved placing sediment from a nearby project onto the landfill's surface. Sediment is a mixture of sand, dirt, or other small particles underwater, You might think of it as mud. The sediment was cleaner than the existing soil at the site and was placed into 2 piles on the site. Then the piles were covered with a synthetic liner to stop rainwater from moving the contaminants off-site. This interim action helps to keep contaminants from running into Bellingham Bay and also reduces the chance for humans and wildlife to be exposed. So the 2 tarps you may have seen on the waterfront are actually a result of this action. This action was funded by the Port of Bellingham, the City of Bellingham, and the Washington State Department of Natural Resources, because each of these groups was identified as a potentially liable person, or PLP, by ecology. These PLPs are previous and current owners and operators of the site, and so they are responsible for site contamination and all aspects of the cleanup process. Therefore, this short-term solution and all further cleanup activities will be funded by these PLPs. For this site, multiple remedial actions were proposed and evaluated based on their ability to protect human health and the environment. In the decision-making process, these different cleanup options are commonly referred to as alternatives, which are basically different ways to go about cleaning up the site to make sure it meets the requirements of MATCA and protects humans and wildlife. The way we choose which alternative we will use is by comparing them to one another through something called a disproportionate cost analysis, or DCA. This considers both the costs and the benefits of each alternative and picks the one that does the best job of balancing cleaning up the site and being cost effective. It is super important to remember that the alternative has to meet the MATCA requirements so it will be protective of human and wildlife health. For the Cornwall landfill site, the alternative that was chosen based on the DCA includes capping, shoreline stabilization, and monitored natural recovery. A cap is simply a layer of material used to cover the source of contamination to prevent chemicals from moving off-site. As you can see in this picture, there's a white plastic layer covered by clean soil. For a portion of the site, a cap will be used to cover and contain contaminated materials. A different portion of the site will also include shoreline stabilization and monitored natural recovery. As you can see here, shoreline stabilization systems can be made of plants, rock, or other materials that will help to prevent erosion. At the Cornwall landfill site, the shoreline stabilization will stop soils from leaving the cap and going into the bay. The final part of the remedial action, which is monitored natural recovery, basically means that we will continue to take samples and analyze whether the chemicals are going away on their own, which can happen with time. This process is expected to take 3 to 4 years to complete. The total cost for the cleanup is estimated to be $9.1 million, which is paid by the PLPs. There are also grants that can help fund the publicly owned PLPs. Once the site is cleaned, it will be turned into a public park and recreational area, as you can see here. As you can tell, there is a lot of work ahead for this site, and cleanup under MATCA can be a very extensive process. However, without this regulation in place, we would be putting Washington citizens and the local wildlife at risk. If you have noticed the tarps on the Bellingham waterfront before, rest assured that there are plans in place to transform this former landfill into a place where people can safely gather and appreciate the natural beauty of our great town. Thanks for your time and attention. If you want to learn more, check out Ecology's website to see if there are public meetings in Bellingham.